Hello everybody, if you're out there, welcome to our online panel discussion for this afternoon as part of Jazz Festival's These Digital Times. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we get started, just to wait till all our attendees have joined. So feel free to grab yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee if you're viewing from home, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Oh, look at all the people. Whoa, 30 people in here. Welcome, guys. If you've just joined us, we're just going to wait a couple of moments before we get started, just to give other participants time to join the discussion. And then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get into our chat for this afternoon. Beautiful. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, welcome panel who I can see in front of me. Welcome attendees from home. My name's Holly Norman and I'm the Program Manager for Melbourne International Jazz Festival. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this online discussion of surviving and thriving in the music industry today. So I'd like to just begin by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and on which our digital festival is taking place today. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of this city and this region, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to introduce our fantastic panellists for this afternoon's discussion. So we've got Xani Kolac, if you can give a little wave through your screen. Xani's a musician, composer and activist. Tracy Margieson, who's the head of program for the Arts and Wellbeing Collective. Luke O'Connor, who's the industry relations and partnerships manager for Supportact. And also Chris Cheers, who's a psychologist specialising in arts practice and working with creative industry workers. So welcome guys, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. And what we're going to be chatting about this afternoon is this concept of surviving and thriving in the music industry. And when we put this panel idea together at the beginning of the year, it was before any of this COVID pandemic business hit, but I think it's definitely more pertinent than ever to have this chat today. And I should also acknowledge as well, the session will be closed captioned. If anybody wants to access closed captions, then you can just press the little CC button down the bottom of your screen that you should be able to see. And I'd also like to give a big thank you to APRA AMCOS for their support of these career development sessions, and also the Arts Centre Melbourne for making these possible. And these sessions as a part of These Digital Times, like I mentioned, which is Jazz Festival's online offering, which is running today and I think across a few other days, which is all completely free, which is amazing. So definitely jump on and have a look at the other sort of stuff that you can access with artists performing from all over the place, which is fantastic. So to kick off, I guess I'd like to just get started by casting a bit of a broad stroke across this topic of mental health in the industry, and why do we find that this is an issue. So we know from research that it's musicians, artists are far more likely to develop issues with anxiety, depression, high stress levels than, you know, perhaps people in different industries. Chris, would you maybe like to speak to that a little bit and tell us maybe why that would be?
Sure. I mean, it's a huge topic to think about, just all the factors that go into why this is such a high-risk community for mental health issues. And I think, you know, they fit under all its socio-biological, psychological factors that all add up to make this, you know, a really challenging space to work. And I think, right now, it's obviously such an important thing to think about. And we're getting to really see the impact of COVID on everything, but especially on an arts community that was already so vulnerable. And, anything from, the funding cuts that just lead to such an unstable sense of security. And I think when we think about mental health, if you go back to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need that safety net of just support and housing and a sense of stability to survive, to thrive, to do anything. And when that's not there, when there's not an income, when there's not a sense that your income is going to be there next week, let alone next month or next year, that sense of being able to plan for the future and that sense of stability for you is just so difficult. And I think that's something that's been in the arts forever, but now more than ever, I think that's just so prevalent and is really leads to, these issues of anxiety and depression that we see. And that's just a small part of the puzzle. And I'm sure everyone else has things to add to understand the difficulties of working in this industry.
For sure. You just mentioned something to do with a hierarchy of needs. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it's just that idea that for us to be able to work or thrive or survive, there's this, or to be happy, or to self-actualize, as Maslow referred to it, we need certain things. And the thing that you need baseline to begin with before you can do anything else, before you look at social support or anything, is just that sense of knowing that you can pay for food and knowing that you have a house to live in. And I think that reality is so stark for so many people in this industry right now that, just being able to pay rent, to have a house, to be able to put food on the table,
Sure.
these things that are so, common and maybe not thought about in other industries, right now. It's just so unstable, that sense. And unfortunately, in this world of capitalism, money means kind of value, and people put the value of themselves, really based on what the value that society is putting on them. And I think an unfortunate, really loud message that's coming through to a lot of people in the arts, a lot of people in musicians, or a lot of people right now, is that the government or funding don't value what you do. And
Definitely.
that permeates right down to a sense of self-worth that I see in my clients, and I'm sure we all see in this industry.
Yeah. I'm seeing lots of nods from the panel on that that topic of funding, definitely, and how everybody's been affected by that. Xani, would you like to share a little bit of thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess when, I have to profess that pre-COVID, I was a workaholic and an extrovert, and COVID really meant that I couldn't thrive in my usual environment. So what I kind of did was, when I lost all my work, is I decided to get really into trying to fix everything and solve the problem. So I became really interested in advocacy for our music industry and joined my musicians union and tried to have meetings with as many people as I possibly could to understand better how our music industry works. I think that a lot of us function and work in this industry, but don't really understand all the different mechanisms that make it function. And I kind of felt really embarrassed and ashamed about that, oh my gosh, I don't even know how my industry works. But then I kind of felt very empowered once I started digging into it, and I felt really free to ask as many questions to all these people as I could. What really happens when I sign away all my rights to APRA? What does that actually mean? And what is our union doing for musicians? What does it even mean to be in a union? And then I've learnt as well the lack of funding and value placed on the arts by federal government. And we're really lucky in Victoria because we've seen a lot more of an investment into funding for the arts at a state level. But also it's been really great to see not only the artists from all different walks of life getting really behind the arts, but also the public really placing value on music and on the arts, and yeah, just having those conversations about, well, when you are stuck at home, where did you turn? And a lot of people turn to the arts.
Yeah. I guess it's, yeah, that concept that, you know, music and the arts is, you know, it's of such a high value. It's where everybody turns for, you know, not only for entertainment, but to, you know, find meaning and that sort of thing. But I guess for the people that are actually producing music and producing art, there's such a, you know, self-identity is just so you know, woven into the ability to go out and do this, to go out and play a gig, to go out and, you know, connect with community, to jam, to form relationships, networks. So having had a lot of that, you know, fall by the wayside, Luke, how have you seen that impact your work?
So I work for Supportact, which is the Australian music industry's charity, and we've kind of evolved over the last 22 years, and I think we reached 50% of our journey as an organisation, and then we've reached the other 50% since COVID hit.
Wow, yeah, it's amazing.
Where we were coming from previously, like we provide a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week wellbeing helpline service in partnership with the Arts and Wellbeing Collective. And as well as providing crisis financial relief for people who hit tough times, who work in the music industry. And those services just exploded, particularly our crisis relief program, which immediately people, the financial stability issues of COVID hitting were remarkable. And then over time, we're starting to see, like was mentioned earlier, people really wanting to talk about the mental health implications on people who work in the arts, when the rug gets pulled out from underneath them so quickly. Thankfully, Supportact has been quite fortunate that we've been entrusted by the federal government to roll out some of the crisis funding that's required. You know, it's a small drop in the ocean, I would imagine, for what will be required as we move into the recovery. But certainly a start and a big challenge for us as an organisation. We've tripled in size for staff in a very short period of time to keep up with the demand. And so just to give you an idea of what kind of demand there is out there from people at the moment. So
amazing. Yeah.
Huge challenge. I feel like we're starting to get our feet back on the ground again.
That's great. And then can I ask as well, prior to COVID, in a, you know, the pre-COVID world, you know, still having, you know, challenges for artists, other than the crisis helpline and referring to professional help, what other sort of maybe measures would you see or recommend for artists to, you know, find, I guess, a balance, a middle ground, and to be able to, yeah, just find happiness?
I think it kind of comes down to a lot of stuff. There's so many factors that feed into a person's well-being, particularly in the music industry. So like was mentioned before, like that feeling of financial stability, there's competitiveness in our industry, and there's also the kind of friction between pursuing art as an artist, but also turning that into commerce and making that a career. And I think it's the kind of thing that lots of musicians, and I'm sure there's lots of musicians, instrumentalists, vocalists, composers, etc., who are hopefully listening in today, that are pursuing it for the love of art, and somewhere along the way it turns into a living. I know that's how it happened for me. Like, I've been a professional musician for 20 years, and you know, I started off just wanting to play some gigs, and you know, the next thing I know, like I was making all of my living out of it, and then all of the things about maintaining that living, and it becomes quite a complicated lifestyle. The fact that you're surrounded by drugs and alcohol a lot of the time, whether you participate or not, if you partake, it can become tiresome as you progress through your career. And if you do participate in drinking, you know, and taking drugs and whatnot, that can potentially lead to real issues. Not to mention all of the other things that go with that, like bad eating habits, touring, post-tour blues, all of those kinds of things that a lot of us would be familiar with. But in terms of like dealing with those stuff, I think we'll probably get to it as we go through. But I do think there are a lot of ways that people can implement well-being into their practice, so that they're not burning themselves out.
Yeah, and burnout's a whole topic of its own. I'll just mention to pause here as well, if anybody's listening and they've got a particular question that they'd like us to address at the end, you can just pop it into the chat, or there's a Q&A box I think that you should be able to see down the bottom, and just let us know which panelist you'd like to address it to, if there's anybody in particular, and we'll allocate some time at the end for questions. So yeah, going back to that point, Luke, of general, being able to look after yourself. Tracy, in terms of your work, can you tell us a little bit about the different sorts of tools and things that you might recommend to artists to, particularly address things like late nights, nutrition? The hours are definitely one of those big challenges. So could you speak a bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of interesting, like your original question around, I think your very first question around why we see a high prevalence of mental health problems in this industry, and just sort of listening to Chris and Xani and Luke reflect on that, and you kind of go, it really is this sort of perfect storm that has been created, and there's sort of those immediate needs that we need around just that. Yeah, safety and security and financial security and that sort of thing. So you kind of take those out, or make them very difficult, make it really difficult to have kind of a steady income and a predictable income even. And then also kind of going, and now we're going to put you on tour. So we're also going to take you away from all of your support networks, from your family and your friends and all the things that you do to keep yourself well. And then we're going to also put you into a really, really tense situation, like the extreme highs and lows of performance, and just the rush of getting the show up, and then really tight scheduling if you're kind of doing, one night stands venue to venue. And then we're also going to mix in with that kind of pretty epic culture of some really challenging things that would sort of that have probably gone a little bit not quite investigated or kind of poked out thoroughly enough to see if they're actually helpful or harmful for our mental health. But then to Xani's point, which I thought was so brilliant, was also around kind of looking at the system. So you sort of go, sometimes you can feel like you're the only one, and you kind of go, is it just me? Did I miss self-care day at school? Like, did I just miss how to do all this stuff? Like, you can kind of just have that thing of just going, am I the only one struggling here? And then I think like the second that you sort of talk to pretty much anyone in this industry, my background is mostly in performing arts, but there's obviously lots of crossover between the two. And as soon as you start talking to people, everyone's like, yeah, I get that. I feel that. I'm struggling with this. I've got no idea what to do about that. And you're like, okay, cool. It's not just me. It's not just something I'm dealing with. And I think the research that has been released in this space was really game-changing in going, actually, this is not any one individual. We can't blame any of the mythology of the tortured artist. Like, all of that just has to be absolutely killed and not given any credence, because this is actually systems, structures, context that we're working in that are placing immense pressure on our people. So I think really investigating what those systems and structures are was such an incredible thing to do, Xani, as well. Sort of go, well, how does all this work? And I think you almost like start peeling back the layers, where we actually drew a bit of an iceberg when we were doing a lot of the Arts and Wellbeing Collective strategy work of going, what presents is mental health problems, and then underneath that, what presents kind of time away from family and friends and cultures of substance use. Then underneath that is a whole lot of mythology we kind of let seep into our minds about this being okay, about this being important for creativity, that we actually suffer. The mythology of the suffering artist, or the romanticization of the tortured, starving artist. It's okay to be broke. In fact, if you're making money, you're maybe not as dedicated to your art. Like, it's all this kind of mythology, and then you kind of go into that and go, well, we've got these systems that are quite exploitative, because people are willing to work for free, and it's really challenging. And then you kind of go underneath that and go, then we've got this whole piece of sort of creative identity, where, as Luke said, a lot of people came to it with love. People don't start working in the industry because it's really good money and really good hours. It's not really kind of a reason we start. We usually get into it because we love it. Where that's just the thing that we do that gives us meaning and gives us purpose. And that's awesome. And I think that's what makes us feel so passionate about this industry, and also feel like we found our tribe and our people, because everyone kind of just gets that inherent meaning and purpose of art. Like that's just in the fabric of our being, and that's awesome. But as a result, it's not sort of a job that when something goes wrong, that which inevitably will, you miss out on a grant, or no one comes to your show, or you get a bad review, or whatever that might be. It's not something where you go, oh, well, that was a tough day at the office, and close the door on it and go to your family and friends and all the other things that give you meaning. It's like your whole self. So you kind of, if we're getting all of our self-esteem and our self-worth and our identity and our purpose from our creative and artistic output, and I think COVID's really highlighted what happens when you go and take that away. And everyone goes, oh my God, like, what do I do? How do I function? How do I look at this? So, yeah, I think we've just got this whole iceberg of kind of challenges. However, I think the silver lining, I guess, of those challenges is that because it's not just, it's not a given. It's not this thing that's like, oh, well, that's just how it is. It's like, no, the research has shown that this is so widespread and so prevalent through our industry, and also so prevalent through all roles. It's not just the domain of our musicians, but also our production teams, our front house teams, our marketing teams, all of the people that go into making this beautiful, vibrant industry. And I think for that matter, we go, well, that does make it a systemic, cultural, structural, environmental challenge. But that means it's in our control. That's the good news.
Yeah.
If it was just this like random gene that everyone who works in the music or theatre industry has, and you're just predisposed and, well, tough, we can't do anything. But if we go, no, this is the industry we created, so we can change it. And I think that's the thing that I think is really cool. That it's not about kind of throwing our hands up. It's about going, well, there's some known challenges, there's some known things that we can unpack and do, and hopefully that's really good news. That there is stuff we can do there. There are tools.
Yeah, for sure. I think you definitely in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, I think the conversation has become much less stigmatized around these issues in particular, which is fantastic. But something that I've always been interested in, like you mentioned, Tracy, and I think particular also to the jazz community, is this concept of, well, that's just the way it is. So you wanted to be a jazz musician, that means X, Y, Z. That means 6 hours in a practice room, limit social interaction, you're going to stay up really, really late, jams only start after midnight and go until 3 or 4 in the morning. So there's kind of this acceptance from even like a pre-professional standpoint during tertiary education that if this is what you want, well, this is what the path looks like, and you must sacrifice sleep, you must sacrifice nutrition, you can't have anything else in your life, because how would you have time? You've got to live with your parents till you're 25, because you're not going to have the time to work, because you're going to be in a practice room, shedding everything in 12 keys. So Xani, do you want to maybe speak to that and tell us a little bit about how you've managed to counter that in your work and your life? Because I see you as somebody that has lots of coping strategies across all of your different work exploits.
Yeah, sure. Got to think about this for a second. I think, everyone has their individual approach and their own kind of flow that they follow. But for me, I'm a violinist, and I began playing classical music, and then wanted to explore different genres of music. So in terms of being a person who felt like if someone said this is how something is, you have to do it like this, I never really had that mindset. So probably the opposite too. If someone said this is how jazz is done, I would have gone, well, I'm going to do the opposite. That's just who I am. But I think that, I probably can't speak about all of those things you mentioned, but these 2 months have been really beneficial for me personally, because it's given me an opportunity to take a big breath and look at what's important to me, to my artistic integrity, also learning about what is realistic in terms of what I can get done in a day. I mean, I am a very prolific artist. I do a lot of things, and people are always going, "You're so busy, Xani," and I thought that that was kind of a measure of success, is by how busy I am. But I don't think that it's good for me. I think I was about to burn out before this whole thing happened, and now lucky that happened. But yeah, I think, look, going forward, there are definitely things that I would implement. So I would make sure that I'm more realistic about how I spend my time. Health is really important. So exercise, eating well. Also, I've probably underestimated how much energy it takes for me to interact with other people out in the world. I thought I was very extroverted and loved being around lots of people, but I have realized that takes a lot of energy just by seeing people gradually again. And I'm like, oh, I'm exhausted. So that thing of staying out late at night and chatting to people, and I mean, a lot of gigs happen from those post-gig chats, and it's something that you can't maintain every night of the week or every week even. So yeah, I think this has been a good period to just take a look at that.
Yeah, definitely. I think oh, sorry, were you about to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump back to what you were saying before, Holly, about that kind of notion of what it is to be a jazz musician. I was thinking about some of like the young musicians that are coming out of university and like having that, they're looking up at the session guys and the freelance performers who are out there gigging every week, making a crust out of it, trying to be one of the guys, you know, like, you know, one of the musicians that's out there working regularly. And, you know, whether it's a hunger for, you know, technical facility, that creates pressure. You're always benchmarking yourself against others all the time, which is healthy, but can also be very unhealthy. And it starts as early as school, and particularly when you're in university, it becomes even more apparent. And then there's the stark reality that, particularly here in Melbourne, you know, we have a commercial industry that's this big, and then a pool of musicians that's this big. You know, whilst you're waiting for the call as a freelance player, that can have a real impact on your mental health. You know, the hustle, regardless of, you know, our discussion today, is real for people who want to make a living out of music. And that takes me back to that balance of art versus commerce. It's really hard. It's really hard when you want to create art, but you also want to make a living. And sometimes I think one thing for myself that's been really beneficial is that idea that you can take yourself out of the mix. You can make that choice. I had a chat this week with Sahara Herald, who was event coordinator of the Big Day Out for 18 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And she had like incredible grief and trauma issues from her personal life, and also that led to alcoholism and drug issues. And she realized that all that time she'd been thinking, I don't know how to take myself out of this. I don't know how to do it. Because you feel like you are cancelled, you're gone if you don't accept everything that comes your way.
Yeah, like you can't say no once to anything.
That's right. I think it's really important for people to know they need to back themselves. It will not be the end of the world if you don't participate and hustle and sacrifice to always be involved in the scene. You know, I'm not going to lie, I'm the kind of artist who does thrive off that. I crave the hustle, and, you know, like, I'm only 25 and I'm looking old for it, but you know, I love those networking and promotional aspects. But even through this lockdown, I've just gone, oh wow, it really feels kind of good to just not be selling myself all the time, and instead be selling Supportact, which is, you know, the new job. But if you're not that kind of person, my advice is that you've got to have the courage in your own ability as well.
Yeah.
You need to take yourself out of unhealthy and hazardous situations and lifestyles. It's really important that you dictate what your career is, and don't let stereotype dictate what it is that you should be doing as a musician.
I think that's such a valuable point. Sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, it's just such a valuable point. As you say, it's just I think too, it's about what does success look like for you. because you're looking at someone else who's got a completely different version of success, and you're going, you know, that's what I need to do. And you're like, yeah, if you want to get to exactly where that person is and everything else that goes with that, and if you're exactly driven by the same things that they are and have the same abilities that they do, which you don't, because no one does, no one's identical, you know, it's that thing of what does success look like for you? And that's, you know, if that, where did that come from? And kind of setting that, I think, can really kind of help it in a more meaningful way. And also too, I think it's this funny thing where everyone in this industry are storytellers. You know, and that's what we thrive on, is telling stories. And humans are storytellers anyway, and then, you know, kind of gets intensified just because of the work that we do and the meaning that we share. But as a result, stories have such credence. So when we tell these war stories, you know, when we tell the stories of what it takes and what it is, we listen to that as truth, not as a story. You know, and you kind of go, that's what it took for that person in that circumstance to achieve the thing that they did. You know, sort of, our brains don't kind of think of it in that same way. And I think that if we really kind of probe the stories we're telling and go, you know, can we tell more stories of people who are going great and looking after themselves in a really positive way? Like, let's tell those stories. Let's tell those stories of what success meant and how people felt balance and what that looked like. Like, make them the stories that we hold on a pedestal and that we aim for. And I think that will help shift the culture and normalize having energy. You know, we'll often kind of judge how successful someone is by how exhausted they are.
Yeah.
You kind of go like, what if we judged it by how much energy they had? You know, if at the end of a tour you went, hey, we're all feeling pretty good. How's everyone? You're feeling pretty good. You know, like, and you go, that's awesome. That's success. You know, like, imagine if we judged it like that. Yeah, you kind of go like, change the stories that we're telling and celebrate differently. Celebrate when we do a good job for ourselves and our families and our people and our humans and our peers. I think that's you know, that's the true success.
I think one of the things that I keep coming back to in terms of this topic is, you know, I always think about, I guess, pathway into the music industry, and the fact that, you know, whether people realize it or not, effectively everybody's signing up to become a sort of sole trader and be their own boss. And that's something that I don't think you ever think about, or that you're ever really, you know, aware of when you sort of find this pathway. But I guess in, you know, in other industries, if you work in real estate or if you work in this or an office or this or that, you know, in most scenarios, you've got somebody higher above you in the chain of command who will say, okay, it's time for your lunch break, or it's time for you to clock off now. But you never have that with music, because, you know, when does your day end? Like, who decides when your practice session is finished? Only you. Who decides, you know, how many gigs to accept in a week? Only you. And I think that something that further complicates that in this day and age is, you know, definitely social media. And like Luke mentioned, this concept of FOMO, or fear of missing out. Like, am I doing as much as my peers? How come this person is doing 7 shows a week and I'm only doing 5? They're playing with so-and-so and I'm not. I feel like maybe I'm not, you know, getting anywhere or going anywhere. As a general, I guess, cultural phenomenon, Chris, would you like to walk us through that a bit?
I think one thing with social media, you know, and what COVID has kind of shown is you've sort of suddenly had this space where, you know, I think as Xani was talking about before, and you've all sort of touched on this sense that artists have to just make do. You know, you accept every gig, you do everything because you feel like there's 100 people waiting behind you who would take that if you didn't say yes. And I think that sense of being able to just say yes has acted in COVID in this pressure that I think a lot of musicians and artists have felt to just suddenly turn their practice online, or suddenly, you know, do the gigs from the bedroom and do, which is incredible to see that pivoting and that adapting that some people have the ability to be and to do. But I think the other side of it is, you know, people who have just really not been able to cope during this period, and that pressure to try and turn their practice into something that looks completely different than what they normally do is, you know, incredibly, you know, it can feel like a pressure, and it can feel like something else that you're not doing right. And when I think it's interesting, a lot of people today have talked about identity when it comes to being an artist, and how much value you you have in yourself. And when you think about at what time in development, you know, I think about developmental psychology, somewhere along the line, you're told what is your worth, you know, you're taught. And if that, when you're a child, if you're a child musician, or then in, you know, a university, if you're the thing you're kind of taught and over again, especially sometimes for a very young age, is your worth is your performance, or your worth is you being a musician, and you should practice more and then you can make it, you know, that. And the classical musicians I work with and the jazz musicians, you know, they may have the stable income, but their issues are sometimes more related to perfectionism or performance anxiety, which is really sort of, and it's interesting, I'm quite anxious as I talk today, which my clients will find hilarious because I work with them with performance anxiety all the time. But I think it's all about learning that, you know, anxiety is a normal part of this process, and me just naming that as normal now, you know, makes me feel more calm. But I think that idea of, yeah, as through development, if you're told that your worth is your performance, and that just permeates your tertiary education, then you end up to this point where during COVID, your work is gone. It's what are you left with? And a really difficult idea that I grapple with a lot of clients is that, you know, art is something you do, it's not who you are, which is a controversial, difficult thing to talk about. But I think so much, as sort of Xani was touching on, that sometimes it's about this period as being able to take a breath and to have some space and to think about, you know, you know, the arts I often talk about as a place where you can enact what's important to you and your values. It's not what is important to you. It's a place where you can enact that. And when you can take a step back and go, well, apart from what my practice as a musician, or apart from my art, what other things in life give my life value? And this period, I think, has allowed, it's kind of forced a space maybe for people to actually think about that. And sometimes connecting to family, connecting to health, connecting to these other values can do so much for your well-being, rather than trying to, you know, hope that your art is the answer to you feeling good about yourself. It's part of it. It's not the whole story.
And I think it comes back to, oh, sorry, Xani, yes, go.
Sorry. Yeah, just on what Chris was saying, I think the identity thing is really interesting, because as artists, kind of really early on, you might start hearing things like, now I want to hear you in your sound, express yourself through your music. And you start kind of focusing on, I've got to find who I am. And then it becomes this long journey of trying to find yourself, or if you're songwriting, if you're composing, even more so, like, what story am I telling? Who am I? And it kind of sets you on this path of getting even more confused about who you are. So, I mean, I know it's taken me a decade to work out who am I, even though it's right there, but you just get so fixated on it that you can sometimes find it's very elusive. And I know that's a bit airy-fairy, but the other thing that happens is you kind of just feel like, when someone says, what are your hobbies? And you're like, my hobby is playing my music. That's the thing that I love doing. I kind of feel a bit weird that I don't have any other hobbies. Like, what else am I going to do with my time? This is what I want to do. I'm doing the thing I love. And then even further, you go, well, I'm trying to not take on this idea that my work is who I am, because without it, I don't have any hobbies. I don't have anything else. Who am I? I don't know who I am. So I really understand if there's anyone out there that has that feeling, because it's really confusing.
Yeah, and I think I think about this one all the time, the concept of balance, and you know, it's all just this big balancing act of trying to juggle. You know, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick up my instrument and I'm going to play for sheer enjoyment as a hobby. I'm going to approach it as a hobbyist. And then there's I'm going to go and pick up my instrument and I'm going to play because I need to learn X amount of charts for this gig, and I'm going to approach it like work. So I'm pretty sure every musician out there can relate to both sides of that. Like, there has to be space for both. But once you allocate time to doing both of those things on any sort of regular basis, where is the time to become an amateur photographer or do any sort of, practice your cooking or bake or anything else that's a hobby? Maybe Tracy, do you want to speak a little bit to how, how you might advise people to, how do people find this balance? Like,
it's so interesting. I love how you say about, am I picking it up for fun? Am I picking this up, this instrument up just to play? And I think that intent, what's that intent behind what you're doing? But the other thing that I was working on something for Arts and Wellbeing Collective, and I was working with one of our wonderful consulting psychologists, and I said to her about this thing, and I said about that kind of, like, it's not even work-life balance, it's just like work-life blur, like it's just, how you do it. And she said, can you give me an example? And I went, okay. I said, all right, so I went to a show. I went to this performance, and I wanted to go because it had a star in it that I really like, a performer in it that I really like. And so, that was the intent of going. It wasn't a work thing, it was whatever. So, and so I'm sitting there at this show, and about 10 minutes in, I'm like, wow, this is a really good show. Like, this is way better than I was kind of only coming to see this person that I wanted to see performing. This is actually really good. And then I was like, there's only 3 people in it. Actually, there's only 3 people. It's a pretty clean set. So 3 people, clean set. How many people are in the house? Okay, it's like 900 in the house. Okay, so 900 people times $100. So then if you starcast one, so if we were to produce this and we starcasted one role, and like my whole brain was just completely, like I just stopped engaging with the show completely and was basically just in, I've got a company outside of Arts Centre, can my company produce this show? Was the only place that my head was in. And I just had gone from this perfectly lovely experience to entirely into workload and doing maths in my head to work out what the break even might be in a small venue. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I just had, and Amy was wonderful psychologist, said to me, so presence. So you just weren't present. You weren't present in what you were doing. And it really kind of struck a chord for me of just going, it's not about not being at work or not being at home or not being, it's just about where are you present? If I'm with my stepson and I'm thinking about work, then I'm not present with him. It doesn't make me less engaged with my work. It's just about where's that presence, and if the presence that you can bring to things, if the presence you bring to performance is the performative energy, and then the presence that you bring to practice is whatever that needs to be. But then the presence of when you're sitting quietly for 5 minutes having a cup of tea, that's what you're doing, and that's what you're enjoying. And it's just that thing of, I just found that really valuable. I know Chris can probably speak to that with a lot more psychological clarity, but that was something that really resonated for me, was about actually what's that intent and what's that presence in those moments that enables you to not feel like you're just working all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I guess, what I'm sort of hearing as you speak to that, Tracy, is this concept, and I think probably everybody can agree with this. Maybe one of the major tools that we're able to develop as musicians and as independent, sole traders effectively running our own businesses is this ability to have awareness and mindfully reflect on like the sort of internal dialogue. And that can sometimes be really, really difficult, because I think particularly with music and maybe particularly with jazz, this sort of negative self-talk. I'm just getting an echo. Where's that coming from? This, the concept of negatively ruminating on, say, a bad gig or something like that, it can just create this funk, I think, in your body that you're walking around with for weeks and maybe might not even be aware that that's something that's happening. So, in terms of developing that sort of self-awareness as a tool to promote positive mental health, Chris, could you speak a bit to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many different strategies there, and they're all going to be so dependent on the individual and what their particular challenges are. But I think one thing to touch on what Tracy was talking about being present, or about, mindfulness, which I'm something we've all heard about. It's a buzz at the moment. But what I like to think about, mindfulness is an effortful presence and an effortful intention. So if you can sit back and decide, what do you judge success in your music as? You know, how do you judge that success? And if you can say, you know, it's about communicating creativity or emotion or the connection with the audience, or what is it that is important to you, it's an effortful thing to keep your focus on that's why you do it. And then during the performance, it's an effortful, mindful practice to focus on that intention. That's what you're there for. You're not kind of concerned about what the audience is thinking, or how many people in the audience, or how much money you've made, or that. It's an effortful practice to try and stay into why you're doing it, what's important to you. And that effortful practice hopefully is the thing that can then get you through when, you know, nobody comes, or you don't get the job that you auditioned for, or that, you know, that idea that, you know, often hear that saying that auditions are the work and jobs are the holiday in music or any sort of arts practice, that you're constantly being judged. And this is the difficult thing about music and the arts industry, is the auditions process. It feels like you're being judged as a person, because you are the, you know, as Xani was talking about, you feel like you're putting yourself into this performance. And that repeatedly sense of judgment can really impact your sense of self-worth, unless you can effortfully choose that I get to decide what I value, and I get to decide why I'm doing this. And if I communicated emotion and creativity, and I communicated through my music what's important to me, then that's the thing that I can get you through to, you know, to keep this up and through those times that are really sort of challenging. But it's certainly not easy, and that in its mindfulness, you know, it's a daily practice. But aside from that, when it comes to mental health, you know, it's the structures of self-care and well-being, which are, you know, exercise, diet, sleep, you know, all those things that are the same to everyone, no matter the industry. But particularly there are pressures within this industry that, as you said, kind of put the tortured artist on the pedestal, as Tracy was going, that the exhausted one is the one, you know, or the one that can stay out all night and drink and then wake up the next day to do a gig is the good one, the cool one, you know. Where how do we say, rather than, you know, self-care being something that you talk about, how do you put that into your daily practice? Not as often self-care can feel like a pressure, like I need to do mindfulness for an hour every day, and if I don't, I should feel guilty. Self-care should really be something where you step us out and say, how do I change the structures of my everyday to make my well-being and health better? And that may mean sacrificing your practice in some way, because you're doing it for your health in another way. And that, you know, that's a very challenging balance that we've sort of touched on. But how do you, you know, change your everyday to make your diet, to make exercise, to make sleep, to make, you know, these things happen that will make your practice better? I think that's an interesting, really helpful thing to try and connect to. That, you know, getting drugged the night before and then waking up and doing a gig won't be as good for your practice as having good self-care and, you know, feeling healthy, and that will make your art better. And that's an interesting narrative to, I guess, to try and challenge and introduce, as Tracy was talking about in this industry.
Definitely, Chris. I want to echo those statements as well. Like, the whole music industry, we're very, very hero focused, you know, and mythology plays a huge part in music, and it's what motivates kids to go, wow, I love what they do, I want to do that. But the mythology of those who've come before us, and the thinking that they were totally infallible, or that they didn't practice thousands of hours or get to where they ended up by not working really hard, or that their ability that they attained, or the success, even mattered when it was at the expense of everything and everyone around them and their own well-being. These are all things that people need to start thinking about in their own planning of their career, you know, like, you know, it's like the Michael Jordan documentary that's just been out lately. It's pretty divisive. Some people think that Jordan's whole mentality towards the game was way too brutal, but he just wanted to be the best, and it was at the expense of a whole lot of things. And I think there's a lot of that thinking in the music industry as well. And as an industry, it's kind of contingent upon, you know, people like us, I guess, and, you know, the labels and the touring companies and, you know, the festivals and the universities, to ensure that we're encouraging healthier workplaces for musicians to interact with, and encouraging healthier lifestyles that, you know, you've got a choice. You can take the rock and roll pathway if you like, you know, or there's alternatives, and it doesn't matter if you decide to treat your body or your mind differently. You won't be judged for it. You don't have to be Miles Davis and a heroin addict to be successful. You know, like you can.
Yeah, I think about
Definitely.
Yeah. I think about like almost the change journey that we went on as an industry with physical safety. So, you know, if you kind of look at like, I don't know, I guess like 30, 40 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, with how we approached physical health and safety, right? And it was very rock and roll. So if you had to move something, if you needed to rig, if you were working at heights, it was like, just do it, just get it up. This is the business. Like, let's just throw it around. And it's like, oh, you can't move that road case by yourself. What, you're too soft, you're too weak. Come on, you can do it. And then we went, hang on, there's a massive cost to the way we're doing business. And you kind of go, people are getting hurt, like people are dying. And we go, no, that's crap. And we just changed that so rapidly, where if someone went, can you help me move this road case? You just wouldn't think twice. You know, if you saw someone working at heights without proper rigging, you'd be like, mate, we've got to change this. Like just that shift that happened with physical safety. And I think now we've kind of got the research to go, you know, the whole, as you're saying, look about the whole kind of rock and roll lifestyle of, you know, drink all night and then just get up and do another gig. And you go, yeah, that's fine. Here's the cost. Here's the human cost. We've actually got the data now. So are we comfortable as an industry with this cost? And if we're not, let's change it. And I think we're sort of on that similar change journey that we were on with physical health and safety and OHS principles a while ago. So I hope that we kind of follow that same trajectory, and then it just becomes so normalised that self-care and good mental health is just like a given, and we actually call people on it if that's not a priority as well. I think that would be amazing.
We've got a couple of questions to move on to. So just to I guess wrap up this part of the conversation, something that I just like to put forward as a positive impact of COVID and what everybody's been living through, and something that I think that's so great that's come out of this, hopefully for everyone, is the ability to just pick up the phone and call somebody, because it's harder to go and see them at a gig. And I think you know, there's heaps of great resources out there, and Tom has linked some of the resources here into the group chat, so everybody should be able to see those in their chat box. Links for Supportact, links for Arts and Wellbeing Collective, links for Xani, links for Chris, so you can follow up on all of this stuff. But yeah, just that idea of you know, maybe just having one friend that you speak to and say, how's it going? You know, how are things? How are you feeling? Do you feel lonely? Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go for a run? I think that's a really positive place to start if people want to sort of get some of that stuff going. And then just to move on to some questions, one question in particular was directed to Chris. I don't know if you saw that one, Chris, in your chat box. A question from Sonia about the anxiety that some women in the industry feel about being a woman in the jazz sector and how they're being treated by their male colleagues, and any sort of strategies that you can recommend for dealing with inclusion to that end.
Well, I'll certainly say something briefly about the mental health aspects, but I'd love Xani and other people to, you know, chime in when it comes to, you know, talking about being a woman working in these industries. That, you know, gender inequality impacts, you know, the musician industry, the arts industry, just like any industry, but particularly the jazz music industry. And I would say if it's anxiety is something to deal with, you know, as Holly was just saying, making sure you're talking to someone about that. Talking especially to other women in your industry and other people who have worked in this space about what they've done, and to know that it's normal to feel that, and it's normal to feel the pressures of gender inequality in this industry. But also, I think in terms of this, have a look at what can be changed about the structures that you're in. You know, is there someone you can talk to that's higher up? Is there someone, you know, what can you change within the festival, within the university structures, or within the arts organization that really tries to battle against that gender inequality? In terms of anxiety, you know, there's heaps of things through the Arts and Wellbeing Collective, through Supportact that I really, you know, lead you to get support there. But also, you know, I'd be amiss to not say try and get a psychologist or a mental health practitioner to talk to about that. But I'd love, you know, especially the other women on the panel to talk to this as well.
Xani, do you have anything to chime in with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sonia and I have talked about this a lot, because there are I think that there are weaknesses in our jazz institutions in terms of the support available for young female musicians. I think that it is really difficult if you don't have a female mentor to go to talk to when you're having these problems, when you're going through university, which is a very vulnerable time. Um, you know, you're being judged a lot. Well, not even judged, just like you're getting critical observations every day, not only from your peers but from your teachers as well. So if you're female identifying and all your teachers are male, it's going to feel very intimidating if you're also getting a bit of grief from your peers. So I think that universities play a big part, or TAFEs or whatever, these teaching institutions have a big part to play in making sure that there's more gender equality on teaching staff. But I've also been teaching a couple of university students during COVID, and I've found for a couple of my students, they have preferred the remote learning because of this reason, that there is less kind of competition, feeling like you're constantly compared to each other. You can have learning that's very kind of self-directed, but also one-on-one time with your teachers. And I think it would be something that could be a possibility or an option going forward, that if some people would enjoy this kind of mode of learning, that should be available to them. It's far more accessible in some ways.
Yeah, great. That's a great point. Thanks, Annie. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question somewhat, Sonia. I'm aware it's a whole different kettle of fish, and one we could talk about for a really long time. But yeah, I guess what I heard with that as well, and just in general to wrap the whole discussion, is having some sort of figure that is a mentor, just somebody that you can go to, relate to, talk to, be a sounding board, similar to having that sort of friend that you can speak to, is just something that's so important. And I think lots of musicians, we can probably all agree, probably assume that they're the only ones that are thinking these thoughts, or I'm the only one that thought I had a really bad gig, or I'm the only one that thought this thing. And I think these are such common issues, for everybody. Totally, yeah. And Miles Davis probably thought that all of his gigs sucked anyway, so like guaranteed. So I think hopefully the more that we can open the conversation and talk about this stuff, the better place to work and live the music industry is going to become. I think that we had better wrap it up there because we've pretty much run out of time. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for being on board for this chat today. It's been awesome to speak to you about a topic that's so close to my heart, and to everybody that's been watching and listening, I really hope that you have gotten something out of it. I think this discussion is going to be archived and should be accessible for later viewing via the Jazz Festival website. And yeah, again, we'd just like to say a big thank you to APRA, AMCOS and Arts and Wellbeing for their support for the session. All of the links are in the chat here if you'd like to follow up on any of the resources that we've discussed for Arts Wellbeing Collective, for Chris Cheers, for Supportact. And yeah, I hope that everybody is doing really well, and that we can all see each other in person very soon. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a brilliant Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ella.